In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the power steering return line. This is the low pressure line on this Dodge Grand Caravan. Let's get started. From underneath the vehicle, if you look from the back side of the engine, you'll see where the two power steering lines go into the rack. We'll have to disconnect the one that's towards the left side or towards the driver's side. Before we do that though, there is a clip holding these two together. So unclip the clip. And now let's remove the fitting off the line. It's going to have an 18mm fitting. I'm using an open-ended wrench because this fitting I've been spraying down and I'm hoping that I can get it to break free like this. Often though, I recommend using a line wrench, also known as a flare nut wrench, because it can avoid stripping out the fitting. But as you can see, mine actually spins somewhat freely. So I got away with an open-ended. If you don't have an open-ended that'll fit in here and you have to use a line wrench, most likely you'll have to take off this other line unless you have a crow's foot adapter for a ratchet, in which case you can just slip that over, but most likely this line is going to be in the way and you won't have enough swing for a regular sized wrench here. Take this off. Some fluid will come out, keep that in mind. Now if you follow the line, this is going to be pretty difficult to see, but there's a 10mm bolt right there to the left of that steering shaft boot. We have to remove that because it holds a bracket that holds the line. All right, remove that bolt, and then you should be able to get that bracket broken free. Now we have to remove the battery to get access to one of the mounting bolts that holds the bracket for this line that we're after. So we have to disconnect it, and then there's a retainer in order to pull off this battery. Use a 10mm socket, disconnect the negative battery terminal, and once you remove or loosen up this nut, you should be able to pull the terminal off and set it aside. Do the same to the positive. Take this off and set it aside. And now if you look between the engine and the battery, you'll see that 13mm bolt right there. We have to remove that in order to remove the clamp that holds the battery. So 13mm socket. It's a fairly long bolt, keep that in mind. Pull that off, remove this plastic retainer. This insulation will come up with the battery. Now it is removable, you can pull that off, but I like to just leave it on the battery because as soon as you pull up on these, it will all slide right out. And the reason for all this was so that we could get access to this 13mm nut, which holds the bracket for that power steering line. Take that off. It's somewhat difficult to see, but there's another 13mm fastener right in that little cubby there. You'll be able to get to it with a swivel socket. There it is. And at the front of the battery box, you'll see another 13mm bolt. This holds on the battery box, but also the power steering line that we're after. So it's a 2-in-1 fastener. Take this out. Now there are a bunch of wires attached to this battery box all over the place, but you don't have to pull them off. You can leave them connected. All you have to do is lift this up a little bit, and if you just reach back here, you can lift this line right out of its retainer and just basically slide it, and then you can set the battery box back down, or battery tray I should say, and that will basically relieve the entire line other than the clamp at the front. Now grab some pliers and pull this clamp back to release the hose. There we go. Now you can grab the hose with the pliers, and if it's stuck on here you can give it a couple twists. Of course try not to damage the hose, but this usually breaks it free. And now we should be able to separate these two. Keep in mind, fluid is most likely going to leak out. There we go. There's our line. If fluid was actively dripping out of here, you would want to plug it up with something. Looks like there isn't really much at all coming out. So now let's get the line out of here. Now back underneath, you should be able to pull on the line, and it should slowly wiggle its way out of here. There it is. Now we have to get the brackets off of these lines so we can reuse them on the new line. To do that, you're going to want to pinch this so that it opens up the line here. just like that, if you have some pliers that fit. If not, you can just use a screwdriver and tap that way. When you take these off, try not to bend them too much. Obviously, you have to bend them a little bit, but try to do it as little as you can. Just so I make sure that the clamps are going in the right spot. I'm going to put the clamp on the new line now. I like to put a little bit of silicone paste in the areas where these bushings sit. You should have new bushings in your line kit. Now make sure your clamp is going in the same orientation. You don't want to put it on backwards by accident. And to close it back off, you want to just squeeze it with some pliers. Try to be gentle, not to damage it in any way, but you want to make sure it's actually closed off. Just like that. And then to get this to lock back in, just pinch that tab shut. Do the same to the other ones, one at a time, so that you make sure they go in the right spot. And with all the brackets installed, put the yellow cap that comes provided with this line on the hose end of it, just like that, so that we can sneak it into the engine bay without debris getting inside the line. And while we're at it, put the O-ring on the fitting end. Make sure the old O-ring came off with the line. It should, usually it does, but sometimes it sticks inside the rack and you don't want to double gasket this. Take the new line and of course follow the same routing as when you took it out. Otherwise it can catch on things. That is definitely not what you want to happen. These brackets are going to have to turn and twist to get the line in there. Now that the line is back in here, let's remove this cap. And we can reconnect this hose. Make sure it's bottomed out all the way, just like that. And now put the clamp on. With these clamps, I like to put them back exactly where they came from, as in line up the mark with the clamp. That will usually give it the best opportunity of sealing back up. Sometimes the hose will be formed to the clamp here. As you can see, it's pretty much slightly squished there. So if you put it right back where it came from, it usually seals up the best. Now lift up the battery tray again, and underneath, we're going to want to fish this clamp back over the stud. Hold that, line it up, drop this back down, and this is now ready to be bolted on. Put this mounting nut back on. Make sure it starts on smoothly, snug it up. I know you can't see this one, I can barely see it too, but start it on. Remember, this one had blue thread locker on it. I left it on, of course, it came with it, so when you thread it on, start it by hand and make sure it threads on smoothly before you thread it in all the way, because with thread locker sometimes you can have it cross thread, and especially if it's a softer grade bolt, you won't know. Once you get it started by hand, snug it up. Make sure it's tight. Last one at the front here. Start that in by hand. Make sure it's tight. Take your battery, put it back down in the battery tray. Put this bracket back in here. Slide the bolt down. I put some anti-seize on its threads. A lot of times they do seize up, so I want to make sure it thread on smoothly. Make sure it's snug. Reconnect your battery. Let's do the positive first. Always do the positive first. Tighten up this mounting nut. Just snug it up. The way you know that it's tight is if you can't spin this by hand, which I can't. And negative battery terminal. Watch out, sometimes it does make a spark. So keep that in mind. And snug this one up as well. Perfect. Now let's go finish reconnecting that line. Back underneath, let's bolt this bracket back onto the subframe here on the side. Try to line up the bolt. Thread it in by hand at first so I can start in nice and smooth, and snug it up. Now let's get the line in to the power steering rack. Make sure it's centered. Press it on and thread on the fitting. I'm going to get this clip clipped on here now just so I can hold the line in place. Now let's grab our wrench and snug up that fitting. When you tighten this, make sure that you don't over tighten it. The O-ring that we put in there, that's what's going to do the sealing. You don't have to completely crush this fitting down, you just have to snug it. Just enough to squish that O-ring. If you over tighten it, it'll actually ruin the O-ring and then you'll have a leak. Alright, so that's getting snug right there. Just going to give it one more good turn. I am using a stubby wrench, so I have to make sure I put a little bit of force into it, just because I don't have a lot of leverage here. That's good. It's nice and snug. There we go. Let's fill up the power steering fluid. On the passenger side of your engine compartment, right where the air filter housing is, you'll see your power steering reservoir. Turn the cap counterclockwise and set it aside. There is some fluid left in here for me, so I'm going to drain it out and then I'll add new fluid. This takes automatic transmission fluid. Keep that in mind. I'm just using a turkey baster for this. If you have a fluid extractor pump, that's even better. Looks like my fluid wasn't too bad to begin with. Just going to wipe up my mess here. And then we're going to fill the reservoir up to the full mark, actually a little bit past it, because there will be air in the system, with, once again, automatic transmission fluid. The system is not too big. If you just have a quart, that should be plenty. All right. Wipe up any drippage here so it doesn't continue going down. And now I'm going to turn the steering wheel left to right, lock to lock, which means all the way left to all the way right. With the engine off, what that's going to do is it's going to manually push fluid through the system. Of course, the power steering pump will not run, but you can still push fluid through it with the power steering rack manually moving. So I want to do that before I turn it on so that the power steering pump doesn't suck in air. That would be bad because it's aerating the fluid, and also it can cause damage to the pump. I put a light behind the reservoir so you can more easily see the level of the fluid, and with the front end raised off the ground so that the tires are freely floating in the air. I'm going to turn the steering wheel lock to lock, left and right. We're going to hopefully bleed most of the air out of the system this way. You don't have to go fast. You can just go slow, left to right. As you can see, a lot of the fluid went down. I'm going to top it off again, and we'll do the same thing again. My fluid is at the perfect level right now, so I'm just going to clean off the leakage here, the spillage, cap it off, and now you'd want to do the same thing with the engine on. So turn on the engine, turn it all the way to the left, all the way to the right, lock to lock. If no more air comes out and the fluid remains the same, you're good to go. If not, top it off and, well, do it again until it stops bleeding air out.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.